We have a second presenter with us today. I'm going to take a guess at the pronunciation of your last name. I think I have Miss Lyons with us.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. It's Dana Lyons.
Dana Lyons. Okay, thank you. And thank you for confirming your first name. Go ahead. We can hear you great.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the plan that was presented today. Just a bit about our organization. I'm Dana Lyons. I'm the president of Street Sister Society. We are a registered nonprofit here in the city of Calgary. We are a street outreach group operating in the downtown core and in the Forest Lawn area. We provide basic life-saving necessities, harm reduction, warm clothing, food, and things for women that are really hard to get, such as bras, period packs, those kinds of things. We have been operating the entire time during the pandemic as well. We have noticed, as Chaz has said, this increase in rough sleepers. When we go out, we primarily go out on Monday nights and then the Forest Lawn area on Thursdays. And Monday night downtown, on average, we will see about 75 people. Out of those 75 people, about 50 of them will be sleeping outside. The situation, in our opinion, is quite dire. People are losing limbs. We see that week to week. We already know the opioid crisis is very intense. And what we're here talking about today is warming centers, and I completely understand that. What I'm really trying to share with you is probably nothing any of you already don't know, but what it looks like on the front line is absolutely direness. There is an underlying and a growing underlying problem with these vulnerable folks not accessing shelters. I concur with Chaz that we have built strong relationships with this population. Now, our group is all women. We are probably 95% healthcare workers, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, nurses, but most of us are working in healthcare that work in our organization. And we have built up wonderful relationships with the folks that we meet on the street. Exactly as Chaz said, we meet them where they're at. We're very low barrier. We provide services, for whatever they need. We do a ton of referrals, those kinds of things. This growing concern of distrust amongst this population is something that probably needs attention. Now, to the point made earlier, is that what's on the table today? Yes and no. I can get behind this plan that is presented. I think it is a very good starting point. I would say this plan and my and is that there be someone who is reviewing to make sure we're actually gathering those people and they're accessing this service. What I would want to avoid is this model going forward. People continue to die and lose limbs because they continue to not access those services. And so one of the questions I have around this plan is if this fails, and we should have a risk mitigation plan in place. If this fails, because already we're seeing failure in the system, even though there's great effort by these organizations, we're seeing this lack of trust. What then? Because the cold weather's on us. Like I said, the situation on the street is like I have never seen before. I did a project in Eastside Vancouver, and I never thought I'd see what I saw there here. And I'm seeing that same thing. It's very, very scary what we see on the street. The other thing I would like to bring attention to is while we support this plan that's going to go forward here, I wondered if there was any consideration for women that are homeless, and we're seeing an increase in those numbers. Oftentimes they have domestic violence and sexual traumas that have gone on. If we continue with the major centers, drop-in, Alpha House, whatever the plan looks like here, to use the facilities that we have, one of the things that we hear from the clients that we serve is the person that they're escaping from is at the shelter, or they have been sexually traumatized in those shelter spaces. And so, that it still raises the question for me, if this doesn't work, then what? Do we have some other plans? I think I'll maybe give a little bit of a comment on other areas of the city. I live in the Northwest. I live in Royal Oak. And I am surprised at the number of people that I run across in the Crowfoot Centre. and yes, Market Mall and some of these other places. And, I don't know what the solution is there. I don't know what would be safe, efficient, and effective in our city. What I would say is, as we learn from this plan and what we put in place here, if it could be adaptable, and meaning that if we hit -30 and we still have people on the streets that are not accessing the services, could there be some sort of algorithm where something else is enacted just to keep people warm? And I don't know if that's possible or not. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyways, I appreciate Council's time today and for hearing a little bit about some of the things that we see on the street, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dana, for joining us today. Appreciate your insight. Do I have any questions for Ms. Lyons? Just confirming the chat. Ms. Lyons, I would like to ask you a question and maybe something that you can give insight. When AHS discharges an individual who has suffered from frostbite, do you know what kind of referral system they have into supports for vulnerable individuals?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I have no insight into the types of referrals that they have there. I have heard from my colleagues unofficially that it is very difficult to refer them out, and they often feel helpless themselves as to where to send them. If there is access issues, barring issues at certain shelters, there often is nowhere for these folks to turn. I mean, we see these folks on the street. In the last 2 weeks, I've seen 2 people. One, a fresh leg amputation, and one, a fresh finger amputation. So I would say that the referral system out, it probably is broken along the way somewhere.
Thanks for that insight. You alluded to it a little bit in your presentation. Can you speak more, just briefly, or just maybe the high points of the challenges that women specifically face sleeping rough?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Women on the street are very vulnerable in so many ways. It is unsafe. It's dangerous. I would even suggest that any one of us that are women on this call, if we were to walk by the drop-in center, we would be scared at just the environment that's around there, let alone if you had been traumatized with some sort of a sexual event.
And so, do you know about the Legacy Project to speak about that? And why would you support Wendy Walk?
Oh, sorry.
Or I think somebody's not on mute.
Can we just confirm everyone except for Ms. Lyons is muted, please? Okay, Ms. Lyons.
Okay, very good. I'll continue. Yeah, thank you. So the women on the street face all kinds of violence, sexual violence on them because they are on the street already, in addition to being traumatized what got them on the street to begin with. There is a lot of sexual exploitation that is going on, and just general feeling of unsafety almost everywhere they go. We have heard extremely horrific stories that, to be honest with you, we never heard in the past, but they seem to be continuing to surface. And there is a lot more single women who are living rough on the streets because they would rather be in a stairwell or a parkade when they sneak in. Some of them tell us that some of the tenants allow them to sneak in at night, to sleep in the doors and stuff like that in apartments to stay warm, because they would rather do that than access the shelter space. And so I've been contemplating that myself. I drive by places like the drop-in center that I'm sure provide a really, really good service. And I drive by there and I think I would be very scared to even walk up to those doors. And I would encourage anyone, if you haven't had a chance to drive by there just to see, would this be safe for any woman who is traumatized? And I think that answer would come pretty clear to you.
Thanks. And maybe just one last question from your experience. Of the number of women that you're encountering on the street, can you maybe just give us a quick idea of, what number of those women are with a partner on the street, and what number of women are Indigenous?
That's a really good question. I wish I had those stats at my fingertip. Now, more than half are Indigenous, and I would say probably 30% have a partner, and that when we see them week to week, that partner may not be the same. And so I use that word partner loosely because I don't think that they're long-term partners. I think they're partners for safety, to be honest with you. And we see a good portion of young women. And by young women, I mean under 30, and many of them in their early 20s.
Thank you for being here. Councillor Wong has a question for you.
Actually, just more a point of order. Is it possible to ask Ms. Lyons and Mr. Smith to stick around if there's questions arising from administration that we can go back to them?
So, Councillor Wong, generally we just have one opportunity to hear from public presenters and ask questions of public presenters. I'm pretty confident that they will both stay with us in the audience or continually to tune in virtually, and that we'll most likely be able to engage with them in future around this conversation.
Okay, just got a line of questions I'm going to have for administration, and I'd like to balance the responses with them. So I'm just wondering what's the best way to approach that?
So I'm going to encourage that you ask the presenters questions right now, and that you ask those same questions of administration. We're in committee, so we're not limited by time. So
okay, thank you. Perhaps I can ask Mr. Smith to come back, and I'll ask Ms. Lyons to start with, if that's okay.
I will grant you that grace, Councillor Wong.
Thank you. Thank you. And the reason I'm posing this right now, this is not what was presented by administration and the Homeless Foundation. It's an alternative option, which I wanted to pose a question. As we heard in the responses, there are a lot of the vulnerable population that are homeless, whether those that we know of, those that we don't know of, are not necessarily in the downtown core, but could be in outlying regions and warming up somewhere and then being placed out because they're closing doors and everything else and such. And what we're hearing is barriers to which they may face in terms of getting into warming centers that may be in the downtown core. So what I was alluding to was the possibility of if there were neighborhood facilities in the northeast, northwest and everything else as such, and or if there was provisions for, if I can use the term, and pardon me if I say it this way, but a free transit service after, say, 9 o'clock to, say, 2 o'clock in the morning, get them into a downtown facility. Would either one of those solutions be amenable to the population? Perhaps Mr. Smith first.
Okay.
Thank you. Sure.
No, Ms. Lyons, go ahead. We're going to ask questions of you first, and then if needed, we'll go back to Mr. Smith.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, very, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wong, for the question. I think that you've hit on something that's really important. I think something along the lines of a shelter bus might be an option to shepherd these folks down to services. In lieu of no services, we will find them outside. And that is where the situation could be quite grave away from the downtown core. So yeah, I think your question around some sort of a service that brings them in, there's things like a brewery bus where it drives all the breweries every 30 minutes kind of thing. What if there was like a shelter bus at certain times that picked up at certain key locations where we know homeless folks frequent until they close, i.e. Market Mall or something like that? I think that's a good idea that should be considered.
Thank you.
And can I add, I suppose it would depend on where that warming center was and who was running that warming center as well, because with the inherent distrust that we do see with certain providers, it might be difficult to, say, use the Calgary Drop-In Center as a warming station and be bringing people from across the city to that location. I wonder if Dana would agree to that sort of, from hearing from my clients and the people we serve, if hers would say the same.
Absolutely. Chaz, we would agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wong. I think I'm just confirming our chat. That concludes any questions that we have for our presenters. So thank you, Mr. Smith, for being here in person. Ms. Lyons, we encourage you, you're welcome to hang up now and then join us on the live.